journalists in Arizona. We are speaking to Camaron Stevenson. Camaron is the founding editor-in-chief political correspondent for the Copper Courier and has worked as a journalist in Phoenix for over a decade. He also teaches multimedia journalism at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University. Did I miss anything, Camaron?
Well, that feels like more of an introduction than I deserve, but we'll stick with that.
All right. Well,
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm so excited. And the last time you were here, it feels like 100 years ago, but it was actually just like the week after Election Day. And like I
Wow,
watched,
which
I
is
know,
about 100 years. Yeah.
and I watched a little bit of the video this morning just to kind of try to refresh my memory about what we talked about. And I'll tell you what, man, it was a bleak day for a lot of people. And so how you holding up, Cameron?
You know, the support of good people like yourself is always it's always good to be surrounded by inspiring people. Also, honestly, keeping up with the news, but getting past all the noise that kind of can be very discouraging. Because from what we talked about, what 5 months ago, 4 months ago, since then, in the couple months right after that, there were all of these very drastic announcements, and it seemed like this everything was falling to authoritarianism. And the playbook for authoritarianism is to consider those uh, declarations as done deals, wins already in the books. Like this has already happened. It's too late. We're steamrolling everything. But we're seeing, as you know, if you're able to pay attention, it's hard to because the truth is often more complex than a simple lie. Is that not only is the Trump administration being stopped at almost every turn, they're failing in the courts. His as we know, dictators and authoritarians don't really get along well, and so his relationships with other strongmen or would-be strongmen are deteriorating. Um, and the lower levels of government were so ready, the Republican side anyway, they were so ready to just bend over and do whatever Trump wanted them to do that they are kind of failing to capitalize on any momentum that they had. So it's interesting because it's a very dark time. We've seen human rights violations happen at an increasing pace. People's lives are being ruined, um, but oh, there is opposition to that. And I think that's something that we lacked when last time we talked is being able to see um, a solution or a way to oppose what was coming. Sorry, that was
Yeah.
probably a really
And
long answer.
no, it was great. It covered everything that I wanted to open up with, because one of the things that you said the last time we talked is how daunting the idea of covering another Trump term is. But I appreciate you pointing out that it's not all hopeless, and we do have avenues through the courts. So, but let's just get it out of the way. The great, big, beautiful billionaire breakup. Is this indicative of, well, first of all, I just want to hear your thoughts on it, generally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I had like a personal confidence that it was a very temporary alliance. People who seek power at that level and are that ruthless, they often can't work well together. They get paranoid, especially as there's leaks. There's things are revealed, and so I think what's going on right now is authentic, in the sense that these two billionaires are using social media platforms that they own to spread propaganda against each other. Um, Unfortunately, I feel like it's the kind of situation where everyone's going to lose. Somehow, they're going to be enemies, but we're all going to still end up on the bad receiving end of both of them.
Mhm.
Um, but it's fun to watch.
And I tell you what, the meme mines have been plentiful. So I've enjoyed sharing memes in the various chat groups that I'm in, and just, I mean, because really that's all we have. Like, all we have in these kind of times is our comfortable community and our creativity and our ability to create art and, commiserate. There's a lot of C's with that alliteration. I'm not sure why. So let's get a little bit more, because, Secular AZ, we're more focused on local politics, and I know that your publication is also focused. You know what? Could you, real quick, for the folks that weren't here back in November or December, whenever it was, just give us a brief, overview of the Copper Courier and the work that you do? Like, what
Yeah,
parts of
yeah,
the
definitely.
valley are, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so the Copper Courier, we are it's an independent newsroom that launched in 2019 as a direct response, one, to the upcoming 2020 election, and as we as journalists, both myself in our newsroom and in newsrooms across the country that our organization has since launched, we just saw this a flood of misinformation, an inability for a lot of traditional journalists to cover it appropriately and adequately. And it gave people who are okay lying a lot of leeway to get away with saying things that weren't true and misleading the public. So the Copper Courier covers, we try and cover Arizona, but the whole state, but most of our reporters are in Maricopa County. And so that's where the bulk of our reporting takes place. Our pride and joy is being able to cover and break down the legislature in ways that people understand it. We have a lot of good outlets here that cover the legislature. Unfortunately, a lot of them are a lot more high level, whereas we are trying to get that information out to people who maybe didn't know that we had a state legislature or don't know how the local process works, which is common. I don't think I knew that we had a state legislature until I was in college.
It's true. It's not, I feel like we spend obviously, back in Illinois, I had in 8th grade, we had to take a, Illinois Constitution test. I think it's also a requirement here. I know it is. I just don't remember what grade level it is to have an Arizona Constitution test here. But, that's like one time, and you're cramming for a test, and all of those facts immediately leave your brain. And we focused far more on the US Constitution when I was, I think, a junior in high school, right? So yeah, and I
Yeah.
will point out, your Instagram is so great. You said you're trying to disseminate this information for folks who might not understand it. And while I know I don't want to make a blanket statement over the age, the demographic that uses Instagram, but it's really a great breakdown for folks maybe who aren't as entrenched in politics as we are. You do a great job.
Yeah,
Oh, and
thank you.
Corey's,
That's
go ahead.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
I appreciate it. I mean, we are very intentional about how we report on different social platforms. And I like to say that the demographic for each platform is based on when that platform peaked. And so, Facebook is really big with Gen X and boomers. Instagram is big with, Gen X, millennials, a little bit of, elder Gen Z. And then TikTok is like younger millennials, Gen Z. And then, you know, a little bit of everything else. And so we do tailor our reporting to meet the people on those platforms, just because information is digested differently. And we've seen a lot of success with that, thankfully.
Yeah, no, it's really, really good. And so, especially if you've got somebody who's like, I'm really not sure what's going on, where could I start? We have a new intern this summer, and so he's also from out of state, but he's going to ASU, and he asked me. And so top of my list was Copper Courier, Arizona Agenda. There's a couple others that I can think of, but you're definitely on the top of my list. I think Phil Haldeman does great work in the West Valley. And I appreciate
Yeah.
those of you who are really focused on. I appreciate the legislative work, but those are the three. Oh, Lookout. Thank you, Ian. Lookout's another great publication. And those are always my go-tos in the state of Arizona, because not enough people are reporting, especially on what's happening at the local level. And as we discussed a few months back, local journalists have been drastically reduced, and the consolidation of the news that we get is so consolidated. So it's really important for everybody that's here on this call to support your local news media outlets like Copper Courier. All right, let's talk a little bit first about since your meat and potatoes really is the state legislature. Can what's your prediction for how many ballot initiatives? Well, how many are there so far, and how many more do you think the voters are going to have to sift through in 2026?
Okay, so you might have to double check me on this because I went through this morning actually to check. I went through all 30 of the pieces of legislation that were sent to the Secretary of State because that's how ballot if they don't sign it, if it doesn't become law where they send it to the governor, ballot propositions go to the Secretary of State. And from what I saw, there weren't any yet that were sent to go to the ballot in 2026. Now, I might have missed something. I don't know if anyone has heard of one, please correct me. But I double checked, and all I saw, and this actually speaks to what I mentioned earlier, which is Republicans at every level ceding power to the federal government, ironically, in the Trump administration, is that all of the things sent to the Secretary of State that have to do with law or changing how we do things in society, they're all urging the President of the United States to do something. And
Hmm.
these are pieces of legislation that in the past that they're issues that would either be legislation you send to the governor or you send to the ballot. They're not doing that. They are fully expecting Trump to, I guess, essentially take over everything, um, which is both bizarre and I mean, we saw this in January when Senator Warren Peterson was asked about the anti-immigration ballot measure that passed last year that had no funding, and people said, "Well, how are you going to implement this law?" And he said, Trump will take care of it. It's not really a big deal anymore. Like the federal government will do it for us." And that's what we're essentially that's what we're seeing at the state level is they're just kind of waiting for him to act.
Such a strange time to be alive. And we're seeing that also at the school board level too, because the more extreme school board members are taking these executive orders and pretending that they're the law of the land, and they're changing policies based on that. And they're revoking, like in Peoria, the certification or they're changing the certification for mental health care workers, right? But they're perfectly
Yeah.
happy with more cops on campus.
Right, right. And no, I want to maybe address some of the comments because I think what Erica and Jude are bringing up is really interesting. Is that it's not that people aren't sending ballot propositions or proposing them; it's that they're not going anywhere. And I'm not sure who the ones are that are proposing them, but my guess would be that they are legislators who either aren't in a position of power or are freshman legislators, because the more experienced ones, they seem more than happy to take a back seat. One interesting thing I've been tracking is so Senator John Kavanaugh, the originator of anti-trans legislation, not just here but throughout the country, is this whole year because his anti-trans legislation has been vetoed or hasn't passed for the past decade plus. And this year, whenever he talks about his bills, he says, "Oh, I'm going to let the voters decide. I'm going to have it sent to the ballot so the voters can decide what it is." He never, his legislation isn't a ballot proposition. He never wrote that. It's just talk. And I think that just speaks to, what Eric and Jude brought up is that the ones who could actually pass ballot propositions aren't doing it because they don't see the need.
Yeah. And, interestingly too, I believe it was, well, okay, I don't want to get into the weeds about that. There's another question here coming from Phil. And he says, Cameron, could you please give us an overview of the current status of ESAs and how public education is being impacted? I saw a news story on this issue last night, but you might be able to provide more details.
Yeah, and Phil, I believe what you're probably talking about is the proposal to amend the Arizona Constitution to constitutionally protect vouchers. That's another one that, again, it's been proposed. It would have to go to the voters, and so I don't see that going anywhere. I mean, the state of vouchers is just increasingly more bleak, I guess. Um, there's still just opposition to any oversight or restrictions on funding them. At the federal level, they want to codify ESA vouchers throughout the entire country to just blanket do what we have here in every other state. Whether or not that happens, I think it's unlikely at this point. But it's still something that's draining funds from public schools, while private schools and parents of wealthy families get to benefit from those subsidies. I mean, we're still essentially subsidizing the rich's education at the expense of everyone else's. And
Mhm.
I don't see that changing for a
Uh,
while.
uh, Speaking of, I'd love to hear your take on, was it Hoffman or Peterson who promoted Kimberly Yee, and she came out swinging way further right on the whole. Like, how do you think that's going to end up for them? Because from what this is anecdotal, but I'm hearing a lot of Republicans who are not happy with the lack of accountability with those vouchers.
Well, that's interesting. Now, when you say they're not happy with it, are you talking about legislators or voters?
Just folks, folks in, I've noticed some of the tides are turning. And again, it's very anecdotal. These are like, school board meetings. These are like parent forums that I creep up on, and Facebook and other social media outlets. But I'm seeing more people who, had identified with more MAGA, not even MAGA, but just more Republican kind of leans. Traditionally Republicans are the party of fiscal responsibility, and they're seeing in front of their very wide open eyes that there's nothing fiscally responsible about this. So like those McCain Republicans, I'm seeing a distrust. So do you think that Yee is, kind of, you know, starting off on the wrong foot by proclaiming how great vouchers are and that we don't need accountability?
Yeah, I mean, I think Yi is always started off on the wrong foot. She found a good spot as treasurer, but doesn't seem like she has the chops to kind of take it anywhere else. And I do think there's a lot of growing dissatisfaction with vouchers, mostly among parents who, one, benefited from the actual original purpose of vouchers, which is, children with disabilities, children who have special education needs, who need some sort of specialized education training, so that helped them pay for that. They're not getting that anymore. People who don't have a reason are able to get voucher approval so much faster than people who actually do, which, interestingly enough, is the same problem we have with marijuana. Medical patients have a harder time getting access than recreational. But I think that block is wanting accountability and transparency. The question is, does that block exist in the Republican primary? Because that's what it'll come down to. And I have very little faith that in Republican primaries.
Well, and this question from Lee kind of goes along with that. And Lee, you might have to define what ROAR, or if you know, Cameron, but the question from Lee is, what's your take on the ROAR, roar of effort, to recall Representatives Livingston, Carbone, Gress, and Montenegro? I mean, that is related, I guess, to the struggle that those parents of, kids who truly have intellectual or developmental disabilities who are trying to access vouchers. That's who those vouchers were for originally. Now they're struggling. Those same parents, many of them probably, are the same ones that are starting these recall efforts. First of all, do you think that they'll actually be successful in those endeavors? And do you think that because of that, it might change the outcomes of those more MAGA and less MAGA candidates in primaries?
Yeah. Well, I I believe that they can get a recall vote to take place. I think that is just a matter of them knocking enough doors and getting enough signatures to get the approval for that recall. Whether or not all of the voters in those districts, then, a majority of them vote to actually recall these legislators, I think is very, very difficult to accomplish. It's hard to get rid of an incumbent in general. I think even with, there were two very unpopular Supreme Court justices last session or last election, and the the thing that they opposed passed, but they also were able to retain their seats. And so I think recalls are really, really difficult unless they're able to get honestly the financial backing to have some sort of news information media campaign to let voters in that district know what's going on.
Mhm. Here is another question. Okay, there's like a ton of this, but the question is coming from Farrell, and she asks, where is the Christian nationalist influence on the legislature? I mean, where is it mostly coming from, I guess, or which politicians are the most Christian nationalists, would you say?
Oh, geez. Well, that's that's a race. I would say, I mean, Hoffman, I think, is a big propagator of it. Although I would also argue he does it because he likes to breed controversy. I think he is a very cynical person who probably personally doesn't care one way or the other. I think, oh, what's his name? I want to say the Gilbert legislator who Farnsworth, perhaps? I want to say it might be Farnsworth, who's blocked any Senate ethics investigations. I think he is one of the quieter Christian nationalists in the sense that he is one, and he'll support legislation, but I don't think he'll be in the front of the crusade. I would say each and every one of them is an enabler, though, which,
Mm.
if you're sitting at a table with 12 Christian nationalists, guess what? You're a Christian nationalist.
Right. Corey is asking, what are your thoughts on the success of HCR 2025? 2025 is the one about ballot initiatives, I think. Is that right?
Um,
I'm trying to, here, I
I'm
got
sorry.
it. I'm pretty sure that HCR 2025 is the one about, I should know this, like putting
I
limitations on, yeah, the 60% super majority to pass any kind of ballot initiative. So this is an HCR. This is the one that they're trying to put forward in front of the voters directly so that they can bypass Hobbes's veto pen.
Okay. Oh, and that was my mistake. I think I combined it with one of the with 2025 from last year. Um, and I mean by success because it hasn't been passed by both chambers. This is a proposal that JD Mesnard has tried to get through multiple times. Oh, I stalled in the Senate. Thank you. This is something he has wanted to happen a lot. Um, there have been similar ballot initiatives in the past to limit ballot initiatives in previous years that have failed. I would be surprised if it makes it on the ballot. But if it does, I don't see it going anywhere as far as becoming law. Ballot initiatives are interestingly because the public has had so little say at the legislature and had to rely on ballot initiatives so much over the past 20 years. I think voters in general are very hesitant to limit their ability to use ballot propositions. And so if it gets onto the ballot or makes it where it's headed next, I don't see it. I would be very, very surprised if it became law.
Okay. Have you been keeping track of how many vetoes Hobbes has stamped this year?
Kind of in the sense that I'm more of a quality over quantity kind of guy.
Yeah.
It, and the Republican legislature, they use that as a tool to make it look like she is just being just obstinate and unhelpful. So she's at 138, so just under 140. She's set to pass last year. I think that's probably what Republicans are going for. They want her to set the record again for most vetoes. A lot of it is Republican greatest hits that they didn't send to the Republican governor because they knew it was unpopular, but they'll send to her because they know she'll veto it. Like things to restrict elections, things to restrict the acknowledgement of the existence of the LGBTQ community. Goofy ones like teaching the Gulf of America in schools. um, which is, that's a virtue signaling thing that the whoever proposed it did it so they could be rah rah, MAGA, and of course she's gonna veto it. Yeah, so there's ones to further criminalize homelessness, ones to make it more difficult to help people who are in a difficult situation, and those are ones again that they send all the time. They sent these last year. They'll probably send them next year.
Yeah, like you said, it's a lot of virtue signaling. There's not a lot of seriousness in any of these bills. I mean, we are in an era of deeply serious elected leadership in both our state and our country. Are there any bills this year that you were surprised that she signed into law?
Yeah. There've been a couple. And I'm Hobbs, I'm sure will always surprise me in some way. Some good ways, some bad. Um One, I was really disappointed to see that she signed one that she vetoed last year, the age verification for sites with sexual content. The guise of it is we want to like protect the children from accidentally coming across pornographic websites. What it really does is it restricts and further erases the LGBTQ community because the language is written so vaguely that um, a website where someone talks about being a lesbian could be considered sexual. Ironically, and I don't know, maybe Secular AZ could look into this for the next election cycle, but I would venture a guess to say that this law would actually require age verification for most Republican campaign websites because they obsess so much about sex, um, that whatever process goes to requiring them to have age verification, I think that could be a fun use of that horrible bill. Just throwing that out there.
I kind of love
Um,
that. Yeah.
a little malicious compliant for you.
Hmm.
Yeah, but there's some other ones. I was pleasantly surprised that the criminal record check for charter school employees passed and was then signed. I'm not surprised she signed it. I'm surprised it was passed, because Republicans are just against any sort of accountability on school funding at all. The
Well, no, wait,
Axon,
hold on. Unless it's a
yeah.
traditional public school. Traditional public
Oh,
schools,
right,
they
right.
want you to jump through all the hoops. Charter schools, for-profit charter schools, all those, no accountability whatsoever. It's
Yeah,
only the traditional
and
public schools.
I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the things that I always train our reporters on, whether it's an intern or someone new or someone just writing education for the first time, because the way that people report on it on education bills is they're saying, oh, they're proposing these restrictions for schools or elementary schools or whatever. But they always specify in the bill that it's only for public schools. It's not for private schools. And I think that's an important thing to report on that usually gets left out. Is yeah, they want extreme oversight for public schools to the point of strangleholding them, whereas private, anyone who uses ESA vouchers, they can go on a ski trip or buy a grand piano and do whatever they want with that money.
Yeah, it's insane. Are there any other bills that she signed that you were surprised by?
One, and I don't have skin in this game because I don't live in Scottsdale. But the one to let Axon build a facility without permission from the city. I just think that's such a strange thing to take that power away from the residents. If there are, I don't know the specific concerns. Because again, I don't live there, so it wouldn't be my vote. But I think that taking that away from the city was a surprising, unnecessary example of the state not letting cities dictate things that are important to them. Yeah. So I just thought that was an interesting one for her to take up.
Well, and it's always too like how they're proposed, who supports them, if there was Democratic support for any of the bills, like all of those factors come into play. The one that surprised and disappointed me was 2880. Like I feel like it, right now there's a lot of okay, first of all, there's a lot of anti-Semitism, but there's also a lot
Yeah.
of like, people who don't truly care about anti-Semitism, who are also promoting, like things that aren't necessarily anti-Semitic as being such. So 2880 was another surprise for me. That one disappointed me because I worry about, the right to assembly, the freedom of speech and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then
So
that's, I mean, anti-Semitism is honestly a lot of Jewish communities are the way that the federal government and by extension the state is using anti-Semitism as a guise to justify authoritarianism is in itself anti-Semitic because
right.
eventually
Yeah.
it will come for every group, if not a white male.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Do you think that, okay, so not only do we have, and I'll tell you what, see, again, it is about how these bills are portrayed, like of course, everybody wants to combat anti-Semitism for sure. And of course, everybody wants to shield children from pornography, right? Like you would be insane to say, no, we want them to be exposed to it. But that's the way that they present these things. And so when I've gone around as a speaker to different organizations throughout Arizona, it's really important for those of us who work in these spaces, especially for somebody who's not necessarily plugged in the way we are, to be able to say to folks that to be able to say this is actually kind of an anti-LGBTQ thing, like because of the way that the law is written, it could include not just pedophiles and creeps, but it could also involve like, and whatever they decide as a pedophile and creep. And we've known for a long time that people in the LGBTQ community have been demonized as such, and that's completely untrue. So people just have to be careful. So my question to you now is, do you think that this move now, we've seen it from Ruben Gallego, our, freshman senator from Arizona. Do you think that this move to target trans athletes is a winning strategy for our politicians?
No, I don't at all. And I think that they will regret doing something so simple as standing up for uh, like the most defenseless group of people who are the facing the brunt of this attack. And I will say, just as a side note, that when they do, go back on standing up for people who, like trans students, trans athletes, letting them know your displeasure with that does make a difference. We did a very brief report on what Senator Gallego said, I think on Instagram yesterday. This morning, I got a call from like three members of his team, wanting to essentially correct the record, because they had heard from so many people. That's and regardless of his opinion is, I believe that Senator Gallego in particular is trying to put his personal opinions aside and do what he thinks the electorate as a whole wants. Like he wants to represent the majority of people. And so up until that point, I think he had mainly been hearing from anti-trans Arizonans. Um, and so that is what he said, is something that minimizes the impact of legislation that hurts trans athletes and trans students in general. And so, yeah, Ian, I think. Oh, okay. I apologize. That's unfortunate. And I hope,
Yeah.
if that is how he feels personally, then that's unfortunate. I do know that he is listening to voters, and so if people reach out, that his team right now in particular is very concerned with fixing what has come out about what, because of what he said in public. So that pressure does work and it does make a difference.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Ian said basically that he meant every word of what he said. There's no record to correct it. He said in front of a room full of Arizonans, including moms of trans kids. For the record, his team was lovely to all people, so that's good to know. And I've heard similar things about his team. And we're seeing a lot of these folks kind of kowtow to this idea that like, oh yeah, we're going to take the most marginalized, group of individuals, the ones who are most threatened by violent attacks. And in fact, like the attacks on them, as we've seen quite frequently, are affecting, cisgender, lesbians. That's what I've seen quite a bit of. And just more recently, I saw a video of a young trans man who was in some southern state where, they needed to really go to the bathroom. And the bathroom didn't have any doors, and there was no way for them to be able to privately use the bathroom in the men's restroom. And because the law in that state was like, you have to go to the bathroom that matches your gender, when they tried to go into the women's bathroom because it matches their birth certificate, well, then the cops came. So this is truly not
Yeah.
about protecting children. It's not about science. It's not about the things that they say that it is. It is about keeping all of us managed, I would argue. That's my opinion. Again, you're a
Yeah.
journalist, so
Well,
you.
well, and it even like just allowing that to be in the public discourse unchallenged has horrible consequences. I mean, we reported earlier this year there was a woman in Tucson who went to the bathroom at, I think, a Walmart or something,
Walmart.
and uh, some bigot saw her, thought she looked like a trans man, and went into the bathroom, had the police come and take her out. One, first of all, we don't have that law. We don't have any bathroom laws in Arizona. And so anyone can use any bathroom. Two, she's a woman. She wasn't trying to make a stance. She wasn't trying to do anything. She just had to go to the bathroom. But just because it is an unchallenged at this point, a lot of Dems like Ruben Gallego are backing off from protecting the trans community. That is an emboldening hate, and allowing people to do things like that. And it's led to violence in the past, and it's only going to increase violent acts in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. There's a few comments here. Corey's saying, yes, thank you, Corey. Less than 1%. Oh, Elizabeth, what exactly did he say? Senator Gallego basically said something about how, yeah, if somebody could throw the link in there, that would be great. But basically just kind of minimizing the struggle that trans folks are going through and saying, that trans women in sports is a real problem. I'm sorry, it's not. There's like over 520,000 NCAA athletes, and like less than 10 individuals are considered trans. And they go through a rigorous process through both an NCAA, and I think there's another, independent like medical, or there's organizations that deal with this stuff. And I'm just sorry, I hate this trope that like, that South Park trope of like, well, I lost in men's sports, so now I'm going to get into women's sports. That is not how any of this works. I mean, look at what happened to the Olympic boxer, who's a woman, but people were freaking out, and this woman was getting death threats, and she lives in a Muslim country too. Like, what are we doing, people? What are we doing? So the Democrats who do that, I'm so done with you. Corey says it's less than 1%. We can't go out for more than a couple of hours because my spouse is terrified of these attacks. Ian says Senator Kelly consistently shows emotional intelligence, even when I disagree with where it takes him on a vote. And if I had to describe the difference between the two men, that's it. If we insist on electing men, we sure better do a better job of making sure that they know that they show empathy and practice it on the regular. Let's see. There's so much happening. This is a really, really big chat happening here. Find something else to do. Oh my gosh, I can't keep up with it all. So let me just see if I could go. More died in Kentucky because they didn't get a warning earlier this month than professional trans athletes. Right. There was no warning to the tornadoes. I mean, we're talking about, uh, 10 out of over 500,000. And meanwhile, Noah is gone. I actually have a friend who volunteers and has this like Noah guy that they meet once a month, and then they meet more frequently during the monsoon season. And he was like, retirement age, but he went to the group and said, yeah, sorry guys, my position's been cut. We won't be able to meet anymore. Like, that's crazy to me.
Wow.
Yeah, so I just think it's really important to point out that if you are on that angry anti-trans train, in my opinion, you're playing right into the hands of the Christian nationalists.
Yeah.
Just saying. Okay. Do you have any insider tea about either party in the state of Arizona that you can share? Only if you can share it.
Um, yeah, I saw there. So this is a just an interesting little tidbit about a bill that was recently signed into law, that I really didn't think it was going to. But are you familiar with the turquoise alert bill or turquoise alert law
Oh,
now?
wait. Is that the missing and murdered Indigenous women? The one that the Ashley's
Yes.
Law? Yes. Oh my gosh. That
Yes.
yes. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was almost killed. And it was introduced by a Republican, Teresa Martinez. It was almost killed by another Republican, Frank Carroll, because the original language of the bill, and you can go through Legiscan or the legislature website and check the difference. Because the original language in the bill said indigenous, and he doesn't
Oh, that's
agree or
woke.
accept or
Yeah,
believe
that's
that
woke.
term. Yeah. Yeah. And so he blocked it. He wouldn't let it get voted on. And Martinez was pissed. Like she was very upset. Like it's a bipartisan bill. Everyone supports it. And he was just blocking it because he didn't like that. But where it got really interesting is so after he blocked it, he had a number of bills that were to go before the committees he was in. And he, I guess, didn't think anything of it, but she just railed into him, like just kind of tore into him in a way that I was very impressed, and I very much enjoyed him just expecting to cruise through this committee meeting, and then her just not letting him go at all. Like if if she had that sort of integrity for every bill and not just this one that she was interested in, and I think we would have a much more successful legislature. But it was fascinating to watch
This
it
is
as it was
this is
happening.
Teresa Martinez?
Yeah,
Whoa, you could
yeah,
knock me over with a feather. I didn't realize that
yeah,
she was, huh. Okay. All right.
yeah.
Well,
I don't know the background of her on this bill, but yeah, it wasn't originally called the turquoise alert. It was called like the Indigenous, women something or other, and it had it referenced indigenous like 14 times. But yeah, Carol wouldn't have it. She got pissed, she railed into him. Eventually he let it do pass through his committee. The language got changed in an amendment, and now it's law.
wow. That's yeah, I've been in a committee with her before, and she's an interesting character. But hey, even a broken clock is right twice a day, right? Good job. Way to go, Rep Martinez. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
There
yeah, I'll take.
All right, there's another question coming from Jude. Any good opening lines for conversation with someone who's totally on opposite sides of these issues? And I guess like I'm assuming that June's saying because, we this group because we are mostly atheists, agnostics, etc. We're not Christian nationalists. Most people in this group tend to lean left. So I guess her question is probably more about how do you talk about this with people who don't lean left?
Yeah, I mean, I think Uh, if it depends on if you're bringing it up or if they are, I guess. Because if you're if you're out with friends or with someone who you're close to, and they, just have some offhand anti-trans comment, I think that's always a good idea to point out what they're doing, in a way that's, not necessarily combative, but just points to just how absurd it is to have that be a sticking issue in their head. Um, point out. Yeah, I always I always lean on sarcasm. I find that's a helpful way. If you're talking with someone like an elected official, you need to do it in a zero sum way that challenges their power, because they don't, except for the rare exception, they don't care about heart-wrenching stories. They don't, they're not swayed by, personal anecdotes. But if they feel like this could put their power at risk, if they feel like this could cost them an election or cost them some sort of support, that's when they listen. And so if that's my best thing is um, find where they are weak and take it from that angle.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And sarcasm. When I was down at the Tucson Festival of Books, there was this gentleman there with his wife, and they were an older couple, and I think he had some kind of like, armed forces hat on. And I can always tell when they walk by the booth because like they kind of give me the side eye, and then like they sometimes they pace back and forth, and they're like, what can I say to her to challenge her worldview? It's almost always white men. I'll let you know that right off the bat. No offense to the white men out there. But
I'm
he,
shocked.
I know the woman just like the wife just like shakes her head and walks by. I know they're, angry or whatever. But he comes up, and one of the volunteers starts talking, and she said, she just starts talking about the issues that we care about. Oh, we're Secular AZ. We've been here since 2010 and blah, blah, blah. And this is what we do. We have a legal team. And he goes, I'm on the other side of this issue. And the volunteer said, oh, so you think there should be more religion in government? And he said, yeah. And so I said, oh, okay. So like the Taliban? And with a straightest face, right? And he got so angry. I thought he might like he came up to the table for a second and his face got really red. I thought he was going to spit on me. But he didn't. And so that's that's the energy we need, like to point out like, okay, so break that down for me because I was basically asking him about his policy. Oh, you're saying you think you need more. Let me try to understand this. So let me compare it to something that I understand. That would be the Taliban. That's right. And then when you take it out of the context in which they mean it, then they get red faced and angry. And so I do kind of enjoy
Yeah,
doing that.
yeah. No, my favorite thing, I think I got this from my wife, but to bring up whenever if someone brings up, we have to protect women's sports because, trans women in sports denigrates the sport. Just like, when was the last time you watched a women's sport?
Yeah.
When did you care? Like, you have never
Who?
cared about women's sports in your life. You
Right.
couldn't name one team, and suddenly
Right.
you're this crusader. Like,
Mhm.
no, you don't care. Sorry, I go, your kid is a baby. They don't care about women's sports. Like, let's get to the real core of the issue. Like, you're being ridiculous, and and you don't actually care about this issue if pressed in the slightest.
Mhm. And there
So
was even
I
the
think
go ahead.
no, I said I think those kind of approaches, not necessarily combative, but just pointing out the absurdity of what people are saying. Because sometimes they don't realize how ridiculous they're being just because they're so in it.
And for the most part, like you said, like the kids don't, most of the kids I know, they really don't care. And even most recently, there was a young woman, a trans athlete. I think she's track and field. I can't remember if she's long jump or high jump or pole vault, one of those. And she ended up having to share the tier with another woman, because of her being trans. But the all of the women apparently, like, and this is what the article said. The article said that the women on her team, even the women who competed against her, were like, this is fine. We're not even like mad about it. So like it's the adults. It's the adults in the room. I see this in school boards all the time. And speaking of school boards, one of the things that we talked about the last time that you were here was Shelley Boggs. Because we were both kind of speculating, like, is she going to, we're not sure exactly what direction that she's going in. So what are your thoughts on the first many appointments that she's had? Have you been following that at all?
Unfortunately, yeah. And they're as bad as they're as terrible as you could expect them to be. People unqualified, people who didn't really want the job, didn't apply, didn't go through like any sort of vetting process, other than the loyalty test, which is following her, you know, Trump administration and anything MAGA. Um, it's also a little concerning that so many appointments have already taken place. I think she's done eight. She's appointed eight school board members, I
Oh,
believe, this
yeah.
year, which is much higher than what it usually is in the first 4 months of a year. And so I think it is important to be more careful, um, or I guess more strategic or more aware of what seem like grassroots campaigns against school board members to bully them into resigning. The situation with Jessica Bueno at the Phoenix Union, like, I don't think what she did was right. I don't think how she handled it was appropriate. And
Mhm.
I think there are a million ways that that situation could have been better handled and remedied so that she could have retained her seat.
Mhm.
Um, she isn't in it anymore, and she got replaced with an extremist. But that also combines with another member of the Phoenix Region School Board, Nikita Ross, who also resigned earlier this year. I don't know why. I don't know the specifics to that. Could be similar. But she has also been replaced by a far right extremist. And so now we are at the position where I believe there's 5 members of that school board. Um, this is one of the most
No, no.
progressive school boards.
In
Oh,
Phoenix Union, there are
do I get it mixed
7.
up?
So that I want to
There
say
are
that they have
7.
2 at, no, you're fine. They have 2 at-large seats, and then I think they have 5
Oh,
different
that's
wards. That's how it works. Yeah.
okay.
Go ahead.
But this is a situation, and I honestly would not be surprised if there was some sort of harassment campaign going on. And I don't get into conspiracy theories, but I would not be surprised to shift the 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 politics and the governing of one of the most like progressive, forward-thinking school districts and one of the largest in the state to be run by far-right extremists. I mean, they've already got 2 more seats than they had 3 months ago, so it's something to be aware of, something to be wary of. And I don't know, that's just something that stuck out to me.
Yeah, no, you said the exact same thing when we spoke last. Okay, this one's just a yes or no. Do you think we'll sine die before Gress's nuptials?
No, I think out of spite, if anything, if the budget was ready by the time he, I I think we're a ways off. Our budget process is very depressing. But I think there's enough people annoyed by Gress that best case scenario is Sine die like as soon right after he's married. Like,
Yeah.
uh,
I mean,
so it's in the back of his head.
I kind of love the fact that it's like, he's kind of like Culloden in a lot of ways. Like his own party really, they're like, oh, we'll just put up with him, right? That's what it feels like.
Fine. Yeah.
It's so
Like,
great. I love it.
okay, you're keeping the seat. That's great, but I hate everything about you.
Yes, it's so true. Because also it's so, first of all, I just struggle to understand log cabin Republicans in the first place. So, like he's right out the gate,
Yeah.
poor Representative Gress. Like, the leopards are just waiting to eat his face. It's adorable. I love that guy. So who do you think will come out on top at the midterms? And we can, I'm talking all of them, but let's take them one by one. Like in the midterms, if we wait, are we going to have elections in 2026? I guess I should start with that.
That's a great place to start. I do have a very dark prediction regarding that, but I'm maybe for sake of time, I'll hold off. So let's optimistically assume that our systems work well enough for us to have free and fair elections in 2026. I think big picture, it's hard to tell. Usually midterms work better for the opposition party. Trump won't be on the ballot, and he's usually the driving factor for Republicans at every level. However, Republicans can put I mean, they can put insurrectionists and rapists on the ballot and they get the nomination. Their quality of candidate is irrelevant as far as I can tell. Whereas Democrats need to have the perfect candidate. And we don't have very many candidates in general who have announced yet. And so I think midterms a lot is going to be determined by the candidates Democrats pick. Are we picking the same people to try and unseat Siscomani and Schweikert as we did last year and the year before? If so, are they changing anything, or are they just hoping that by the rule of attrition, eventually they'll win? The state legislature, that one it's a tough nut to crack in the sense that the people who turn out in midterms, if they're displeased with Republicans, if in Arizona for whatever reason, they decide to do a balancing act where they will vote Democrats federally, but Republicans locally. That's just what happens. Even when we had a majority Democratic congressional representation in the House, even when we won, Democrats won both Senate seats. Republicans still keep the legislature. And so
Mhm.
it's I don't know if it's the Wild West mentality of, I'm independent, so I need to split things, or if it's just ballot fall off, where people who are more left leaning are looking at the federal government, so they vote, but they don't know locally, so they just sit it out. All that to say, predictions are hard.
Predictions are hard. How about, I know that you dabble in school board. Do you have any thoughts about that? Do you think that this whole, maybe the combination of the vouchers, the elimination of social workers in certain districts, et cetera, like, like the attention grabbing headlines of Heather Rooks and Peoria Unified costing them, nearly $750,000. Will that change things?
Um, I think when you get that local, you either have a hyperactive voter base or a non-existent one.
Mhm.
Um, the only caveat to that is I think things like school board races, they get boosted when there are statewide education ballot pieces on the ballot, whether it's a ballot initiative regarding education, whether it's a superintendent race, which we will have. I think those will be a bigger factor to drive those local races. I mean, school boards are tough because it's an unpaid position. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
people still profit off it, but it's an unpaid
Oh, yeah.
position. And so that goes to who's willing to put money into those races. So is Turning Point focused on those races? Because they'll dump money. Are there, are there opposing side financial backing for, Democrats on school board races? Not that I'm aware of, but I think that's going to come down to that sort of thing. Is there something to motivate an otherwise inactive base of voters, or is there something happening hyper locally that will get people to act? And this, I know we're really out of time, but this goes into a bigger thing that I would love to do a long investigative piece on just how vouchers have really deteriorated our communities, our sense of community, and our neighborhoods, and feeling close. And I think we're seeing that in the number of bond overrides that are not passing. There's more and
Mhm.
more every year, and it's because people don't feel connected to
Mhm.
schools, and their kids don't go to those schools. You could have one street with 10 kids on it and they could go to 10 different schools.
True.
And so when that happens, they can't vote in their school's elections, so they don't have an opinion. But they don't want to have an opinion on their school board either. And by extension, they don't see why their school board needs more money because they're not benefiting from it.
Mhm.
Um, that's something that I've been going back and forth on a while. But
It-
I think as long as we are getting rid of that sense of community that public schools naturally used to provide, that there's going to be less investment, financially as well as like personally, like from people.
We actually kind of had a similar discussion the last time we talked about the difference between like, I'm gonna just the American way of I'm gonna just get whatever I can and screw everybody else, and
Yeah.
that more collectivist culture. Okay, is it okay? I want to check your time. I know that we're really close, we're over time, but I have one last question for you about
I'm
what's
I'm
happening.
okay.
Okay. Because obviously there's drama within the Democratic Party, both nationally and here in Arizona. And broad overview. I'd love to hear your thoughts, folks in the audience. I'd also love to hear your thoughts about the feud that's happening right now with the head of the Arizona Democratic Party. What is Robert Branscombe is his name? And then
Yeah.
this scathing letter that he published, and then the response from our elected leadership. Their gala event was a complete flop. I think it had to be canceled. What's your prediction for the Democratic Party in Arizona?
I mean, my I guess cynical take is that the Republican Party had a very similar implosion before 2024, where they switched chairs, they didn't have a headquarters, they were bankrupt and they won everywhere. So if I guess if that is a sort of karmic energy, then the Dems are in good shape. But I think realistically, both of these implosions kind of, and I'm sure people will disagree with this, and that's fine. I think it goes to show how little voters care or are interested in party politics. I think that people more and more, I mean, there's always going to be a base where they've, this group of people, 20% votes Dem every time. This group of 20% votes Republican every time. I think a growing number of people, including younger people, think that parties are kind of garbage, and they are voting. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean they're voting on policy, they're voting on personality. And so I think, honestly, and again, like, just to this point, Democrats had like an insanely effective, well-oiled outreach machine during the last election, but it was labeled as the Democrats. And so that automatically turns off, so many independents, or, people who consider themselves independent minded, who want to stay away from parties. And so I think it's interesting to watch. I hope good comes of this drama they got going on. I hope that they are able to respect the union that just formed within the party. I think anything else is just disregarding core values of supporting labor. But I don't know that it's really going to have an impact in how people cast their ballot.
Mm-hmm. Corey just said Working Families Party. And at the same time that you said that, Corey, I got a notification on my phone from Flavor Flav, letting me know that the Working Families Party is doing all they can to preserve our democracy and fight fascism. So with that, I think that's a perfect, whenever Flavor Flav enters the chat, I think it's a good enough time for us to just be like, okay, let's be done. Not because I don't like him, but more because, like, I think we have a task now, right? And so let's close it out the way that I always do, Cameron. In these dark times, I mean, I consider them dark. I think most people do. What gives you hope?
Uh, I'll bookend it with what I started with. Being able to, one, filter out noise, because there's so much that is intentionally put in our path to discourage us, dissuade us, get us to tune out and think it's too much, and that, what's the point anyway? It's that cynicism that allows, Russia's elections to continue to elect the same person forever because there's such low interest. And finding where things that matter are actually happening, in each branch of government, in the legislative, in the judicial, and in the executive by way of the people. There is successful, effective opposition to authoritarianism. It's just a matter of pushing past what's happening and finding it.
Right on. And thankfully,
Um,
there's yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was saying, if I could just add one quick thing. Sorry to taint this with a plug at the end, but I have recently started a column for our national outlet, Courier Newsroom. I'll put the link in here. It's a daily newsletter. It's on Substack, or you can just check it out whenever. It's at beltway.news. I maybe it didn't link.
Yeah, let's see if I
But
can find it so I can put the link in. Oops.
Okay, thanks. But yeah, it's, if you have the chance to check it out, I encourage you to. It's what, and I do exactly what I just broke down. I find little bits of opposition that are happening throughout the country. I also take some time to insane wash. The term sane washing, where reporters makes this absurd thing seem normal. I insane wash it, where I take it and I just point out the absurdities of what's actually going on. And I found it very therapeutic, if nothing else.
Well, right on. And thank you so much, Lindsay, for putting the link in there. I've got it right here. I plan on subscribing. We'll see if I end up paying for it, because like everything's more expensive right now. So we'll have
There's
to wait
only a
and
free
see.
one, so don't
Okay,
worry.
okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I am so happy that you were here today, Cameron. Again, you are truly in my top 3 for news outlets here in Arizona. I very much appreciate the work that you do here, as does everybody else here. So if you're not already subscribed to Copper Courier and now beltway.news, please do so. And I'm sure this is not the last we'll see of you, Cameron. Thank you for joining us.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you.
And
Have a
thanks for
great
all the
weekend,
questions,
everybody.
everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Have a great weekend. Take care.